So when a bank lends money, it's pretty much a fact of life that some people aren't going to pay it back. It's a given. But how do they take that messy human uncertainty and turn it into a cold, hard number they can actually plan for? Well, it all comes down to a really elegant three-part formula that turns what looks like random chance into a predictable cost. And we're going to break it all down.
Okay, picture this. An alert flashes in the bank's risk department. A loan has just defaulted. What do you think is the very first, most important question they ask themselves? You might think you know the answer, but it's actually the key to how the entire business of banking works.
Because, look, the real question isn't if the loan went bad. I mean, that ship has sailed. The truly crucial question is, after the dust settles, after all is said and done, how much money did we actually lose? Because a default and a loss are two totally different things. To figure out that final loss, we have to start at the beginning. We need to know the total amount of money that was on the table the exact moment the loan went sideways. And this brings us to our first key term. It's called exposure at defaults, or EAD for short. And it sounds fancy, but it's actually super straightforward. It's simply the outstanding balance of the loan at the very moment the borrower stops paying. You can think of it as the bank's total potential headache. To make this crystal clear, let's just use a really simple example we can all understand: a car loan. Imagine a bank lends someone $20,000 to go buy a brand new car. So for a year or so, everything's going great. The borrower is making their monthly payments on time. But then, life happens. They lose their job and just can't make the payments anymore. At the exact moment they officially default, the remaining balance on that loan is $18,000.
And boom, right there. That's our EAD. The exposure at default is exactly that remaining balance, $18,000. That's the absolute maximum amount the bank could possibly lose. But, and this is a big but, they usually don't lose all of it. And that brings us to the next piece of this puzzle. See, just because $18,000 is on the line, that does not mean it's the final loss. Banks have ways of clawing some of that money back. This is where a metric called loss given default, or LGD, comes in. And the key phrase here is after all recovery efforts. This isn't about the initial shock of the default. It's about what's left on the table after the bank has done everything it can to get its money back, which usually means selling off whatever collateral was tied to the loan. Let's go back to our car loan. The bank can't get the $18,000 in cash anymore, but they can get the car. So they repossess it, they take it to an auction, and they manage to sell it for $13,500. So the actual final loss isn't $18,000 at all. It's $4,500. Now, to turn that dollar amount into the LGD percentage, it's a simple calculation. The bank just divides the total amount it actually lost by the amount that was on the line to begin with. So in our case, that's $4,500 divided by $18,000, which gives us a loss given default of 25%. Think about that. Even though the initial exposure was 18 grand, the actual loss was only a quarter of that. That is a huge difference, and it really shows you why having good collateral is so incredibly important. Okay, so now we have the two main ingredients for what happens after a default has already occurred. But the real magic for a bank is being able to predict these losses before they ever happen. So let's get to the final step and see how this all comes together. This is where all the data scientists and their algorithms come in. Banks analyze millions and millions of past loans to figure out the likelihood that a certain type of borrower will default. This is called the probability of default, or PD. For our car loan borrower, let's just say the bank's data tells them that PD is 5%. So now we have all three of our pieces. We know the probability of default is 5%. We know if a default happens, the loss given default will be 25%. And we know the exposure at default is $18,000. The big question is, how do you combine all of that to find the average predictable loss for every single loan like this one? Well, the solution is this beautiful, powerful, and surprisingly simple formula. The expected loss is just the probability of default times the loss given default times the exposure at default. And I'm not exaggerating when I say this is one of the most fundamental calculations in all of finance. Let's just plug in our numbers and see what happens. We take 5% times 25% times our $18,000 exposure. The result? $225. And here's the crucial point. That means for every single loan of this type that the bank issues, it can expect, on average, to lose $225.
Now, $225 might not sound like a lot of money, but when you multiply that by hundreds of thousands or even millions of loans, that number becomes the very engine that drives how a bank operates, how it prices its products, and how it manages its risk. So why is this so important? Because expected loss isn't a surprise. It's the predictable, recurring cost of lending money. Banks treat it just like any other business expense, like paying rent or salaries. It gets baked directly into the interest rate you pay on a loan, and it tells them how much cash they need to keep in reserve for a rainy day. And you can see that distinction perfectly right here. That dotted line represents the expected loss. It's the normal, predictable, baseline cost of doing business that a bank just plans for. The real trouble, the stuff that keeps them up at night, is the unexpected loss. Anything that spikes above that line. That's a much bigger problem, and that's what a bank has to cover with its capital reserves. This quote really gets to the heart of it. That $225 isn't just some risk metric. It's a line item in the price of the loan. Just like the source material says, the interest rate you pay is specifically designed to cover the bank's own costs, their expected losses, and then finally, whatever's left over is their profit.
So I'll leave you with this question to chew on, using what we've just learned. What's actually riskier for a bank? A loan that's pretty likely to default but is backed by fantastic collateral, which means a really low LGD, or a loan to a super reliable borrower who will almost certainly not default but has zero collateral, meaning if they do, it's a 100% LGD. The answer lies in that simple formula: PD times LGD times EAD.